So in the last video, we downloaded an HTML document from the National Weather Service website, but it wasn't the easiest to analyze. This is where the BeautifulSoup library can come in handy in order to help us parse this document. In other words, help us read it, which will then help us extract the relevant text from that p tag that we are targeting. Now obviously this is just an example of extraction and may not end up being useful practically, but this will help us in our next objective to extract live forecast information in subsequent videos. Now, as is always the case, when using a library, we first have to import the library. So we can start by putting from BS4 import BeautifulSoup. So it goes without saying that you have to make sure you've installed this library if you want to utilize its functionality. So make sure you have this installed before trying to import it. The next thing we need to do is create an instance of the BeautifulSoup class in order to parse our HTML document. So we'll create a variable called soup and set this equal to a call on the BeautifulSoup class, in which we'll pass in two pieces of information. The first argument will be the markup or document that we want to parse. Now, seeing as we've created a response object called page, and this has a property called content, which brings back the HTML document, we can pass in page.content as the first argument. Now, seeing as this is an HTML document and not an XML file, we want the parser to assess HTML data. Hence, the second argument we pass into the BeautifulSoup class is a string HTML.parser, and this lets the system know that we are trying to parse an HTML document. Now, with this instance created, we can now print out the HTML content of the page, but this time in a nicer format. How do we do this? Well, we can use the prettify method on the BeautifulSoup object. So if I type print and then in brackets put soup.prettify with parentheses, you can see we print to the screen an easier to read document. For example, you can see the doc type at the top. We then have indentations for the HTML tag, followed by nested head tags and the nested title tag, and so on. Now, if I scroll down, I'll eventually get to my body tag, which would then contain the content. So certainly an easier way to observe the HTML. Now, this step isn't strictly necessary, and when you're more comfortable with navigating HTML, you won't always bother with it. But it can be helpful to look at prettified HTML to make the structure of the page and seeing where the tags are nested easier to see. Now, as we've seen, all the tags are nested at a certain level, depending on the tag in question. So we can move through the structure one level at a time. Now, in order to do this, we can first select all the elements at the top level of the page using the children property of soup. Now remember, a child tag is a tag that is nested in a parent tag. So if I run soup.children, you can see we return a generator, more specifically a list iterator, but if I then pass this into the built-in list function, we then get a list of HTML content. Now this essentially tells us that there are two tags at the top level of the page. We have the doc type tag and we have the HTML tag. Now there are also two new line characters in the list as well, but let's see what the type of each element in this list is. So I can use list comprehension to see what type of object each element is. So if I put square brackets, then put type and then pass in item for item in list and then pass in soup.children, you can see that when I run this code cell, we get the following returned. So what does this tell us? Well, it firstly tells us that all of the items are BeautifulSoup objects. The first is a navigable string which represents text found in the HTML document, and you can see that this is the syntax for a new line. The second is a doc type object, which contains information about the type of the document. You can see the third element is once again a navigable string, which represents that text found in the document. For us, it's a new line. And the final item is a tag object, which contains other nested tags. So the most important object type here for us, and the one we'll deal with most often, is the tag object. Now the tag object allows us to navigate through an HTML document and extract other tags and text. So seeing as we know we want the main HTML tag, because that's where our contents reside, we can now select the HTML tag and its children by taking the fourth item in the list. So by simply using list indexing, we can now create a variable called HTML and then set this equal to list and pass in soup.children, and then we can put square brackets and then index at number 3. Now each item in the list that we've returned by the children property is also a BeautifulSoup object. So we can now also call the children method on this new variable called HTML. So let's find the children inside of the HTML tag. So if I now put list and then pass into parentheses HTML.children, and then loop through each element to see what objects we have. So if I copy and paste the list comprehension from above and then change the variable to be HTML.children, you can see that we return the following. So let's see what these relate to. Well, the navigable string are the new lines in this list, and the two tags relate firstly to the head tag, which can be seen here. And if I scroll further down this list, you can see we eventually get to the body tag down here. So we essentially return a head and body tag from the HTML object. We want to eventually extract the text inside the p tag, so we'll dive into the body tag. So we could now keep repeating this pattern, going one level lower each time until we arrive at that p tag that contains the summary text. So I could set a variable called body and set this equal to list and then html.children and then index the fourth element. So if we pass in 3 into square brackets, I can then take a look at the children of the body tag. So if I put list and then pass into brackets body.children, we end up getting this list for which we can extract the tag in which our summary text would reside. But rather than wasting time doing this, you've probably already guessed that this is not the most efficient way of doing things, as we have to observe the structure of the page first and then drill down to our desired level. So what I've shown here is useful for figuring out how to navigate a page, but it was taking a lot of commands to do something fairly simple. Now, if we want to extract a single tag, we can instead use the find_all method on our soup object, and this will find all the instances of a tag on a page. So we've already created our soup object, which is a call on the BeautifulSoup class in which we pass in our HTML document and then specify it to be an HTML parser. I can then call the findAll method. So if I put soup.find_all and then in parentheses pass in p as a string, when I run this code cell, you can instantly see that we have our summary text right here. It's not the cleanest, but we've certainly navigated to it a lot quicker than going through tag by tag. Now we can see that we've been provided with a list here, and it looks like our specific paragraph that we require is at index 1, i.e. element 2. So if I create a variable called summary_text and set this equal to soup.find_all, pass in p in single quotes, and then index element 1. When I then take a look to see what's stored in summary_text, we bring back this paragraph tag with the respective text, but I can now extract this text specifically by setting summary text to equal summary text dot, and then access a method called get_text, which will actually extract the text from within this p tag. When I then take a look to see what's stored in summary_text, we get this returned. So we have some white space that we can remove, so we can now call upon the .strip method on this string object. And when I do this, you can see that we get that summary text returned accordingly. And we've been able to do this by first of all downloading the HTML document from the respective website, parsing through the HTML document to find this p tag, and then extracting the text from this p tag and then tidying it up with the strip method. You're picking up a lot of web scraping skills here, but there's one more thing I want to show you before moving on to scraping forecast information from the National Weather Service website. And this is the concept of searching for tags by the class name or the ID name. So I'll see you in the next video.